Horror has always had a fraught relationship with society. By its nature, it's meant to cross boundaries that other works don't. It exposes us to our fears, questions the nature of our lives and even existence itself, and allows audiences to indulge in experiences they would never want in real life. As such, the genre has gone through continual cycles of acceptance and rejection in countries around the world. Some decades have seen horror strongly embraced by audiences who find it to reflect their viewpoint very closely. At other times, cultures and governments have rejected horror to the point of trying to stamp it out of existence. Over the last century, moments like the enacting of the Hays Code in the 1930s nearly destroyed the universal monsters before they could rise to prominence. Frederick Wertham's Seduction of the Innocent attempted to wipe out EC Comics and much more in the 1950s. The Satanic Panic of the 1980s saw an extreme pushback from puritanical beliefs that made massive accusations and stirred fear for years in the United States. But today, I want to talk about the European counterpart to the Satanic Panic, the moment where the government in the United Kingdom brought the hammer down on horror in an era where home video, boundary-pushing films, and the conservative movement under Margaret Thatcher all collided under one single term: the video nasty. For nearly 2 decades, the video nasty label was used to prosecute, ban, and demonize 72 officially categorized films, but so many more unofficially seen as a threat to society. But where did it all start? How did it end? And how is this era of moral panic still impacting horror today? Let's dig deep into the rise, fall, and legacy of the video nasty. Being a horror fan means you never really know where your tastes stand in terms of relation to mainstream culture. Is what you like outdated, in vogue, mainstream, seen as an outcast? This can change decade from decade or even year by year, all depending on where popular taste stands and what's embraced by the culture at any given moment. But through it all, I've found that there's this constant cycle in culture that you can find a ton of different examples of, and it goes something like this. A new technology is invented, it's embraced and spreads really fast and faster than any sort of government regulation can really understand, and then it's pushed past those sorts of moral and ethical and societal boundaries, and eventually the government cracks down and there are new laws and a sort of moral pushback that really pushes back hard. Sometimes that leads to this new invention or movement being completely squashed, or sometimes it levels out to some sort of new norm within the society that it happens. And eventually it either becomes a standardized part of communities or it is eliminated or pushed to the fringes. And in the case of video nasties, the invention that sparked it all was the VHS.
Ask your dealer to let you compare the JVC VHS with other systems. You'll JVC the difference.
The process that led up to the creation and standardization of the VHS tape actually took decades, but it was the effort of JVC in Japan during the 70s and the creation of the VCR in 1976 that truly changed everything, with the first VCR coming to the US in 1977 and the UK in 1978. Over time, VHS tapes would be able to record higher quality and longer videos. But what was most important was that, alongside the concurrent rise of Betamax and the few that could afford to own and run film reels, people could finally own recordings of film and TV in their homes for the first time. Previously, the only way to really watch a movie outside of the theater was through TV broadcasts. Of course, this meant that stations would censor films or just not show them in order to avoid controversy with a broad viewership where anyone could be watching. Obviously, horror was impacted the most. A movie like The Exorcist from 1973, despite being a massive hit, wasn't aired on TV until 1980 in a heavily edited version. And plenty more horror movies took even longer to be aired. But with studios now able to reproduce and sell their films on VHS, people could now own and have access to any film they wanted, with the rise of the video rental store coinciding for huge profits and both new and old films getting a new lease on life. Of course, you don't have to be much of a horror fan to know that the end of the 70s brought a lot of bloody, graphic, and boundary-pushing films that were out of the norm for what had come before in the past several decades. This caused a lot of controversy with ratings, and sometimes these movies simply went unrated. And if you look at a lot of political trends happening at the same time, you'll notice a huge swing toward conservatism happening around the world. Republican Ronald Reagan defeated incumbent Democrat Jimmy Carter in the United States and remained in office throughout the 80s. Conservative Margaret Thatcher served as Prime Minister in the UK from 1979 through 1990. Helmut Kohl of the Christian Democrat Union served as Chancellor of Germany from 1982 through 1998. So what you have here is an unprecedented rise in access to media at home, horror films courting controversy and censorship more than ever, and a rise in conservative politics. And the result was panic. Important to note here, like I alluded to earlier, there was no governing body that was dedicated to home video and VHS at the time in the UK as videos began to spread throughout the whole nation. So as such, the UK used the Obscene Publications Act of 1959 to govern what should be allowed onto home video. Also crucial to understand is that this existed separately from the British Board of Film Classification, or BBFC, which certified or rated films for a theatrical release. Because of that, some films that were refused certification or banned from theaters by the BBFC were quickly pushed to VHS for release, working around their previous ban from the nation. And so, seeing a big influx of controversial horror movies sent to video stores and homes without regulation, the UK applied the governance of the Obscene Publications Act at the start of the 1980s, which defined obscenity as that which may tend to deprave and corrupt persons who are likely, having regard to all relevant circumstances, to read, see, or hear the matter contained or embodied in it. That means that if you think a kid is going to watch something not suitable for them, even if no kid ever has, then you can ban it. However, despite the law not being created for the new technology, this was used to specifically target video for its ease of access without the need for identification demanded by theatrical ratings, and essentially put horror on the same level as pornography in the country, and as such, allowed local authorities to seize anything they felt fell into this broad definition as obscene, entirely dependent on local authority judgment and not a specific ruling. All it really took was someone complaining that a film was obscene and it would be targeted. This also meant that the Director of Public Prosecutions, or DPP, could prosecute a film's producers, distributors, and the retailers holding them on a movie-by-movie basis. Still, during 1980 and 1981, very few films were actually targeted by the law. For the first several years of the 1980s, the list of films that were being prosecuted under the Obscene Publications Act were actually not public knowledge. That all changed in 1982, and leads us to who is probably the central figure of this entire controversy, Mary Whitehouse.
I have never seen a video nasty. I wouldn't. I have far too much.
How can you judge on a video nasty?
Oh,
Have you never
easy.
seen one?
Look, if somebody tells me, as we get these reports in from Europe, from America, and from this country, that a particular video nasty contains that, and that, I actually don't need to see visually what I know is in that film.
Whitehouse, a grammar school teacher and a conservative activist, founded the National Viewers and Listeners Association, or NVALA, in 1965 to campaign against any and all media that it found offensive and harmful to audiences. Whitehouse's first target was television, and the BBC's programming in particular, and over time, she campaigned against things like war coverage on TV, saying that seeing the real-life impact of war was bad for Britain, and that its citizens should not know the truth so that they could keep enlisting. Okay, that's terrible. She also hated Doctor Who, seeing it as a children's program that was too violent for its audience. Every Whovian watching this was just deeply offended about their live-action cartoon. It shouldn't surprise you that she was also staunchly against homosexuality, but she was also strongly in favor of protecting children. It's just that she saw everything as a threat. But they say that the people who have the most internalized shame are the ones who judge others the most. And from my experience with the most judgmental people in my life, it's true. Oh, it's damn true. And Mary Whitehouse must have been sitting on a mountain of shame from the way she acted. And so, when Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister, the highly conservative leader became an ally to Whitehouse. And that brings us back to our main topic in the year 1982, where several huge mistakes were made. First, Vipco, the UK distributor of Abel Ferrara's The Driller Killer, bad movie but that's not the point, bought full-page ads in multiple magazines using the film's bloody cover, which caused many complaints from readers. But taking the phrase, "there's no such thing as bad press," a little too far, Go Video, the distributors of Cannibal Holocaust, wrote an anonymous complaint to Whitehouse and the NVALA about their own movie, hoping that the controversy would push more people to watch it. Instead, Whitehouse was set off like a bomb, as it was Whitehouse herself that coined the term video nasties in 1982, taking the existing term of paperback nasty, used to define many pieces of horror fiction in the 70s, and applying it to the exploding market of VHS horror that had begun to be targeted by the government. Now, what was a quiet government campaign became public knowledge and the source of massive controversy, with the Sunday Times, the Daily Mail, and more publications jumping on the hot topic to rile up the public and sell copies. Maybe the most influential article within all of this was the Sunday Times piece, "How High Street Horror is Invading the Home" from May 23, 1982 by Peter Chippendale. In it, Chippendale outlined multiple films known as nasties, and in an interview secured for the piece, Mike Baer, head of Astra Video, distributors of I Spit on Your Grave, openly said that he and fellow video distributors were untouchable, saying there was no censorship law on video at all. What can they do about it? Well, they were about to find out what could be done. Now papers were publishing stories saying that killers and rapists were compelled to commit their crimes by the horror films they'd watched at home, with I Spit on Your Grave, The Evil Dead, and The Last House on the Left in particular often to blame. Whitehouse had a supreme hatred for The Evil Dead, labeling it the #1 video nasty. What an honor! And railing against it to the point that Sam Raimi himself, director of The Evil Dead, traveled to England to defend his film in court, claiming to have a slapstick humor focus instead of the supposed intention to warp the minds of children. The film, along with other nasties, was spliced together in what was essentially a video nasty gore supercut by Whitehouse. Wow. A real pioneer, and played for the House of Commons in 1983 to show them all the supposed depravity that needed to be fought against. Soon, the public was reporting more and more videos as being obscene, causing an endless spiral of panic, judgment, and government crackdown. The first films confiscated by the newly empowered Obscene Publications Squad were SS Experiment Camp, I Spit on Your Grave, and The Driller Killer. And soon, Tobe Hooper's Eaten Alive, aka Death Trap, was added, and it, along with The Driller Killer, were the first two films to be successfully prosecuted under the OPA, with hundreds of copies and their masters seized in August of 1982. So it should come as no surprise that this sent video rental store owners into an absolute panic. There was no dedicated list of video nasties. Anything could be added to the list at a moment's notice, and when it was done, their shops could be raided, and all of their VHSs could be taken and seized and destroyed, and then they could be prosecuted under this law. Under the DPP's Video Nasties classification, a video could be found as in violation of Section 2 of the Obscene Publications Act, meaning that they were illegal to possess and distribute, and any dealers or distributors found in possession of them could be prosecuted for disseminating obscene materials. If found guilty, a dealer could be fined or jailed, and the film would be declared as obscene and illegal to distribute or sell in the United Kingdom until the identified obscenities were removed. In total, there were 72 films included in the Director of Public Prosecution's list, and are all generally referred to as video nasties. However, 39 of these were successfully prosecuted, but another 33 were dropped. Also, some of those that were classified as being actually prosecuted were eventually censored and published on VHS under the OPA's guidelines. So let's go through all of them to give you a complete picture, starting with the successfully prosecuted 39. Absurd, Anthropophagus, Axe, A Bay of Blood, The Beast in Heat, Blood Feast, Blood Rights, Bloody Moon, The Burning, great movie, Cannibal Apocalypse, Cannibal Ferox, Cannibal Holocaust. You can see a bit of a recurring theme there. The Cannibal Man, oh, gotta add that one in too. Devil Hunter, Don't Go in the Woods, The Driller Killer, Evil Speak, Exposé, Faces of Death, still controversial today. Fight for Your Life, Flesh for Frankenstein, Forest of Fear, Gestapo's Last Orgy, okay, I can see why. The House by the Cemetery, The House on the Edge of the Park, I Spit on Your Grave, Island of Death, The Last House on the Left, Love Camp 7, Madhouse, Mardi Gras Massacre, Nightmares in a Damaged Brain, Night of the Bloody Apes, Night of the Demon, SS Experiment Camp, okay, Tenebrae, come on, The Werewolf and the Yeti, what, really? And Zombie Flesh Eaters, which I love. Looking at these, you can see certain recurring themes about what was sure to get a horror movie banned. Cannibalism, Nazis, animal cruelty, some real, some fake, sexual violence, and the devil. However, it's still almost random and down to the personal tastes or distastes of a censor. As I mentioned earlier, some films that made it to VHS in the UK had been previously banned from cinemas, but were able to work around it due to the lack of laws surrounding video. These included A Bay of Blood, Fight for Your Life, The House on the Edge of the Park, and The Last House on the Left. So it's not surprising that when UK laws struck back, these were quickly put on the video nasty list. However, several movies in the list were originally released in theaters, some with cuts, some without, only to get the video nasty hammer dropped on them afterward, including Absurd, Axe, Bloody Moon, The Burning, Exposé, Flesh for Frankenstein, The House by the Cemetery, Island of Death, Nightmares in a Damaged Brain, Night of the Bloody Apes, Tenebrae, and Zombie. Once again, this highlights the disconnect between what Britain saw as safe for theaters versus the home, with paranoia around children watching horror movies at home and somehow being turned into psychopaths by what they saw, propelling the continued lockdown on VHS. But it wasn't just the standard of morality or screaming about innocent children that informed all this. There was a streak of classism to it all too. In particular, Chief Censor James Furman, after screening the Texas Chainsaw Massacre for review, said, "It's alright for you middle-class cineasts to see this film, but what would happen if a factory worker in Manchester happened to see it? Yes, you have to keep those lowly poors from seeing horror. It may warp their diseased minds." Skipping ahead in our story, some of these films would eventually be released with cuts years later, some uncut decades later, and a few have still never been approved for release in the UK. But in any case, their prosecution as video nasties led to these 39 films being completely demonized by the government throughout the 80s. That brings us to the Drop 33. These were not included in Section 2 of the OPA and were instead dropped down to Section 3. This meant that possession of them didn't lead to you being prosecuted for obscenity. However, these still could be seized and destroyed if they were found in your collection. The 33, which includes some real bangers, are The Beyond, love it, The Boogeyman, Butcher, Baker, Nightmare Maker, pretty good, Cannibal Terror, Contamination, Dead and Buried, Eaten Alive, Deep River Savages, Delirium, Don't Go in the House, Don't Go Near the Park, Don't Look in the Basement, very original stuff there, The Evil Dead, come on, Frozen Scream, The Fun House, Human Experiments, I Miss You, Hugs and Kisses, oh that sounds nice, Inferno, Killer Nun, Late Night Trains, The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, Possession, The Dorm That Dripped Blood, Prisoner of the Cannibal God, Revenge of the Boogeyman, The Slayer, Night School, The Toolbox Murders, Unhinged, Visiting Hours, The Witch Who Came from the Sea, Women Behind Bars, and Hell of the Living Dead, which is too silly to prosecute. So now you have a rundown on everything that was officially titled a video nasty and banned in the UK. However, the list is actually way bigger than this. There are another 82 movies that were directly added to Section 3 of the law, which means that they were banned and could be destroyed, and weren't originally part of the Section 2, whether they were prosecuted or dropped. Think of it as being shamed for having these, but not officially deemed a dang-ass freak. Okay, ready for another list? Let's go. Abducted, The Aftermath, The Black Room, Bloodlust, Bloodsong, Blue Eyes of the Broken Doll, Brutes and Savages, Cannibal, Cannibal World, The Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith, The Child, Christmas Evil, Alice Sweet Alice, Dawn of the Dead, Dawn of the Mummy, Dead Kids, Death Weekend, Deep Red, Demented, The Demons, Don't Answer the Phone, Eaten Alive, Enter the Devil, The Erotic Rites of Frankenstein, The Evil, The Executioner, Final Exam, Foxy Brown, Friday the 13th Part 2, GBH, Graduation Day, Happy Birthday to Me, The Headless Eyes, Hell Prison, The Hills Have Eyes, Home Sweet Home, Honeymoon Horror, Inseminoid, Invasion of the Blood Farmers, The Killing Hour, The Last Horror Film, The Last Hunter, The Love Butcher, Mad Foxes, Mark of the Devil, Martin, Massacre Mansion, Mausoleum, Midnight, Naked Fist, The Nesting, The New Adventures of Snow White, Night Beast, Night of the Living Dead, Nightmare City, Oasis of the Zombies, Parasite, Phantasm, Pigs, Prey, Prom Night, Rabid, The Prowler, Savage Terror, Scanners, Scream for Vengeance, Shogun Assassin, Street Killers, Suicide Cult, Superstition, Suspiria, Terror, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Thing, Tomb of the Living Dead, The Toy Box, Werewolf Woman, Wrong Way, Extro, Zombie Holocaust, and Zombie Lake. All in all, that's a massive list of 154 movies outright banned in the UK and punishable by law. In the decades that followed, some of these movies would be heavily edited and resubmitted for video distribution. And with the Video Recordings Act in place, more on that in a minute, studios now had a much more defined review process to work around, even if it was still unfairly targeting horror out of a sense of moral panic and superiority. The United Kingdom wasn't the only place in Europe to heavily censor and ban horror starting in the 80s. Of course, being part of the UK meant that the same censorship applied to Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, but Germany in particular has a massive history of film censorship and bans under the Federal Agency for Child and Youth Protection in the media. It's not surprising given the country's history, but it has carried on until today in a much more consistent form than Britain. Even France and Spain, more lax regarding art, have had their moments of censorship, each giving a snapshot of their country's political changes regarding film. One important impact of the classification in the UK is that, given the taboo nature of the video nasty and how its reputation spread like wildfire, being put on any tier in the list caused horror fans and the counterculture to become much more interested in these films. Finding, watching, copying, and spreading video nasties became its own hobby. Why wouldn't a horror fan want to go out and find a horror movie that was seemingly so disturbing and disgusting and horrifying that it immediately sent the government into a panic without them even watching it? I bet that makes you want to go out and find these movies right now, doesn't it, you little gremlin? Now, these films were more than films. Their very existence was seen as a real-life horror, and to say that you found them, watched them, and got away with it made you a rebel. All of this panic, media sensationalism, and banning happened over the course of just 2 years. So what changed? Well, it's not that the UK's stance against horror suddenly changed overnight. It's that the big gap between theatrical film regulation and home video laws was finally closed and fully defined by UK law. And it was thanks in large part to campaigning by Mary Whitehouse and the NVALA that the UK would eventually pass the Video Recordings Act of 1984, which created much more defined guidelines and required certification of video releases by the BBFC. Not only was every film released on video required to be submitted to the BBFC, but every film released prior to the Act's passing was required to be resubmitted or else banned from the nation, which led to some previously approved and distributed movies, like The Exorcist, simply disappearing from shelves when their studios declined to resubmit them. Under the Act, the British Board of Film Censors was renamed to the British Board of Film Classification, and was put in charge of the certification of both cinema and video releases. The Act also ratified the paranoia around videos into law, with videos still given a separate classification process than theatrical films, and censored in ways theatrical releases of the same movies were not. In addition, supplying unclassified videos and 15 and 18 certified videos to underage consumers in the UK became a criminal offense. Video stores and their content had been permanently locked down and fully tied to UK law and regulation, and the horror films that activists had campaigned against for their slice of attention and power had been fully pushed out of the nation. So, how did the era of the video nasty actually end? Well, there wasn't some huge shift in UK's law or some sudden change that ended this. Really, England's moral panic over horror continued well through the 90s, with Child's Play 3 in particular being prosecuted by governments and seen as being tied to a really horrific murder when there really wasn't anything like that at all. And you can see a lot of those instances continuing to happen over the next following decades and even through today. Really, it's just a matter of public perception and attitudes towards horror changing over time, and therefore leading to the laxing of the laws and regulations around them. There is still a Video Recordings Act in place in the UK. It's just that the 1984 version has been replaced by a 2010 version due to the finding of some legal loopholes. And with conservative shitstirrers like Whitehouse long gone and the VHS a distant memory, times have changed, even if the laws really haven't. So, what is the legacy of the video nasty and really the entire moral panic and backlash against horror overall? Well, I would say that nothing has really changed, just the targets have shifted. Video games, the internet, social media, they've all had their own witch hunts due to various reasons, but I think they all find their roots in the same sort of conservative moral backlash against something that is new and strange and unknown by older generations, especially those who are highly conservative. It's just that changes in technology have made them harder and harder to regulate, and if anything, the stance toward horror and moral outrage against it has slowly lessened over time. Sure, the 90s still carried a lot of that moral outrage towards horror, but I would say that the 2000s changed all of that. One fascinating statistic I found is that after the September 11th terrorist attacks, horror actually boomed. Places like Universal Halloween Horror Nights set attendance records, and the genre continued to become darker, bloodier, and more confrontational during the 2000s. That all keeps changing, and what popular horror looks like is constantly fluctuating from even year to year, but I think it speaks to something about the genre that I've always found to be true. Horror is a release valve. Horror lets us experience these really terrible situations and our fears about the world and our lives and our relationships in ways that are safe and even entertaining. We take our fears, we take our worries, we take even our darkest views about the world and about ourselves, and we put them up on screen or in a book or on TV, and then we let them play out in ways that are socially acceptable, at least for a little while. It's safe, it's fun, it lets us be honest about what we think and feel about the world, and the more that gets suppressed by those in control, the more we really need it, and the more that people are willing to go outside of regulations in order to experience it. I mean, look at me. Seriously, look at me. Don't you think that I've got a lot of my own personal issues? I mean, I dive deeper into horror than anyone else I know in my personal life. And that's because I'm obsessed with it. But horror makes me really happy. I'm not trying to be overly dwelling on darkness in every moment of my life. I'm not trying to be overly negative or critical about everything in my daily life. I'm not trying to be a spot of darkness on the people that I know and I love. But this allows me to have something that I really need. It helps me to accept the happy with the sad, the joyful with the dark. It helps me to find truth about the world, but also to have a level reaction to it, to be able to accept when things go bad, and to be able to understand and be happy with the things that go right in everyday life as well. I want to hold the traumatic and the healing equally in my life, and horror helps me do that. As far as the movies classified as video nasties, did most of them deserve to be banned? Obviously not. Are all of them good? No, a lot of them are terrible and try to cover up their lack of quality with shocking content. But that doesn't mean they deserve to be demonized. And even decades later, I think there's still some semblance of a taboo reputation to a lot of the movies once classified as video nasties. Even today, when movies like A Bay of Blood or The Driller Killer have been given official, high-definition home video re-releases. But the old era of banned VHSs, trips to the rental store when the horror aisle and its insane covers waited to scare us, and nostalgia for an analog age have caused some horror fans to seek out all these old, bad-looking tapes because they carry an edge and an air from another era when horror was scary enough to send governments into a panic. The past isn't always better than the present. In fact, a lot of times, it sucked way more. But that's not to say streaming is all that better, especially when companies can delete your purchases and change media at a moment's notice. And when it comes to the era of the video nasty, there's nothing better about it. Let's move on, please. Thanks for watching today's video, and this is a bit of a blend of two types of videos that I love to do on my channel, which is horror history and a deep dive into the ways in which media and studios shifted over time. And so I've been wanting to do two videos for a while now. One being a look at the video nasty, which is what you've got today, and another being a look at the satanic panic in the US, which I'll do eventually. But diving into the video nasty was a big education for me, because I had known about it for a while, but I didn't know the specifics and the laws and the details around it all. So it was awesome to be able to dive into this really insane period of horror in Europe and how the British government tried to stamp it out, and why. Sure, I think that a lot of the movies included in the video nasties, especially the ones in the prosecuted list, are kind of bad and are honestly just shocking for being shocking and trying to get some sort of attention and money by being over the top and gross. However, that does not mean that they deserve to be prosecuted and demonized. They're not real, they're not snuff films, they're not actual acts caught on video. They are films. They are fictional dramas and horror, and they're not actual crimes. It is ridiculous that they were prosecuted as such. And any government that tries to stamp out films and freedom of speech are very willing to stamp out even more and to trample on the rights of its citizens. So if a country is trying to get rid of art, you can see them trying to also get rid of a lot more rights beyond that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the video nasties, any movies included in the video nasty list that you actually like, and any other periods of regulation and laws and horror history that you'd like for me to cover. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons and members for their continued support, and if you'd like to be a member or patron, it's only $2 a month for early access to every video and exclusive reviews. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves and having a great Son of Summerween.